Folks, you ready to start?
Yep.
Let's do. Good evening and welcome. And welcome to those of you who are joining us online. Be turning, if you would, to 2 Timothy chapter 2, where we'll be tonight, continuing our study of Paul's last letter that he writes to his son in the gospel. As we mentioned last week, this is a very personal letter that Paul is writing. He's writing from his cell on death row in a prison in Rome. And it's a very personal letter to young Timothy, and it's to encourage him to carry on with the work that they've been involved in together. And Timothy's got some issues that we've already discussed. He's fairly young. He tends to be rather reserved at times. He's got some health issues. And yet Paul is going to encourage him and say, you can do this, Timothy. You've got an incredible spiritual pedigree through your grandmother and your mother. You had the opportunity to travel with Paul on these missionary journeys. You've seen how it's done. You've got some experience. You've got a gift. There was the laying on of hands that, and you've got a gift, and then you've got the Holy Spirit also, who is strengthening you. And so you need to strengthen your resolve, Timothy. There's going to be obstacles. You're going to get discouraged. You're going to feel overwhelmed at times. But don't be ashamed of the gospel. Don't be ashamed of the name of Christ. Don't be ashamed of God's people. And he reminds Timothy that salvation is more than forgiveness. God has called us with a holy calling. And salvation denotes God's comprehensive purpose by which he justifies us, he sanctifies us, he glorifies us, and accepts us as righteous through Christ and transforms us by his Spirit into the image of his dear Son. So as Richard shared with us last Sunday night, Paul's transparent, and he certainly is in this letter. Paul lets us into his heart. He lets us into his head. He shares with us his loneliness. He shares with us his disappointments. There are people who have let him down, people who've betrayed him. He says, all those in Asia have abandoned me. But the first chapter ends on a bright note, bringing attention to a man named Onesiphorus, whom he says has oft refreshed me. He lifted my spirits. He sought me out at great risk to himself. So with that, let's get into chapter 2. Unless you've got some thoughts carry over from last week. Anybody got any things you want to add or? All right, chapter 2 is filled with advice. We mentioned last week one of the themes that runs all the way through this letter is Paul's advice to young Timothy. Remember, he regards Timothy as his son, and fathers tend to give advice whether the son wants it or not. And so there's going to be a whole lot of advice, particularly in this chapter, reminding him of how important it is that he carries out his duties. Never mind what others are saying about you or your tendency to be rather shy, or you can do this, and we're going to do it. He's been instructed to guard this deposit, this gospel that has been given to him. And that's a military term. Timothy, you need to guard that gospel, protect it so that it's not lost, that it's not damaged, that it's protected against thieves or marauders. And there are going to be those who are going to try to do that, who are going to try to damage that gospel. And given the fact that so many people are abandoning and deserting, Paul mentions all those in Asia have left. Paul is saying, my time's limited here. So it's even more important for you to step up, do what needs to be done. And so there's a line of succession here. 1961, Inauguration Day. President John Kennedy is being inaugurated as the new president. And in that inaugural speech, he said, "Let the word go forth, the torch has been passed." And it has been. He's 43 years old. He's the first president born in the 20th century. The man he is replacing is right there. That's Eisenhower. Eisenhower is 70 years old. He's old enough to be Kennedy's father. And so a new generation is coming on to take power and lead the country forward. And the same thing here, Paul is saying to Timothy. A new generation, the torch is being passed. Paul is nearing the end of his life. And Timothy, it's your turn to drive the bus. You take over and assume responsibility for what we've been doing together. And so it's going to be a relay. There's a line of succession here. Paul says, God entrusted me with this gospel, and I'm entrusting it to you. And you're going to find other faithful people to pass it on to, just like a relay team. And they, in turn, are going to find other faithful people to teach it. And so I'm teaching it to you, you teach it to them, they teach it to the next round. And we got to keep this going. All it takes is one generation for the gospel to disappear. One generation who doesn't do what they need to do. So Paul says, I'm passing the torch to you. And you've got a responsibility to keep it going. And that's a awesome, sobering responsibility for this young man. Imagine you're going to take Paul's place. And all that Paul has done for the last 30 years. And here you are, you've got the responsibility to carry it forward. The college basketball tournament's starting this week. Clint, did you know that? You're aware of that? The basketball coach at Duke University, Mike Krzyzewski, he's been at Duke for 42 years. He has won 1,200 games, 5 national championships. He has taken his team to the Final Four 12 times. He's retiring. His successor has been named. He's a young guy. He was a player for Coach K. And he's been his #1 assistant for the last 5 years. Imagine the pressure of this young man, what the expectation of the Duke fan base is of this guy. Imagine the pressure on young Timothy as he takes up the mantle. He takes the baton from Paul to run with it. It's going to be difficult. It's a pressure-filled situation for this young man. So Paul has cast a long shadow. But Timothy, it's your turn to go with it. Any thoughts regarding that? In leading this discussion with young Timothy, Paul is going to use some similarities, some analogies, some comparisons. Your responsibilities are comparable to those, first of all, he says, of a soldier. And this is a very common analogy, metaphor that's used throughout various parts of the New. Paul uses it a lot in his writings. And it's one that Timothy or the other readers would readily recognize, because Roman soldiers are very highly visible. in the city of Ephesus, where Timothy is. Ephesus was a leading city, the leading city in the richest region of the Roman Empire. It is second only to Rome itself as far as its commercial and cultural center is concerned. There's a Roman governor there. And there is also a large contingency of Roman soldiers. And so they're everywhere. And so when he uses the analogy of the metaphor of a soldier, Timothy would readily recognize that because of their high visibility. And remember, when Paul writes the letter to the Ephesians, which also was a prison epistle, he uses that analogy there. Chapter 6, put on the whole armor of God. And he compares the armor, the Christian armor, with the Roman soldier's armor. The breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit. And they could readily make that connection, that comparison. Because of the armor that the Roman soldier wore. And we still use it today. John led us in a song, I think just last Sunday. Soldiers of Christ, arise and put your armor on. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching us to war. Frequent comparisons. Stand up for Jesus, you soldiers of the cross. And so that's a common analogy that is used frequently in Paul's day as well as in our own day. Now, soldiers expect hardship. They get involved in a situation where they know there's going to be risk. There's going to be suffering. That's just kind of a matter of course of what soldiers expect. They don't expect luxuries, but rather they expect a hardness and a severity and austerity and self-denial. And that's what Paul says you got to do. You got to assume the role and the responsibility, take on the task that a soldier would take on. It's a difficult task, and it's going to be dangerous, and it may cost you your life, as a soldier would expect. Richard, a couple of weeks ago, used the Alamo as an illustration, and I'll kind of play off of that a little bit, being a Texan. The Texans decided that they could no longer live under the government of Santa Ana. So they declared their independence. They're going to be an independent nation. And Santa Ana wasn't going to have that. So he brought his army to the north, and a small contingency of the resistance movement took refuge in an old Spanish mission called the Alamo. There's 183 of them in there. Their commander is a man named William Barrett Travis. He's 27 years old. And they're clearly outnumbered. 5,000 Mexican soldiers against 183 Texans. So early in the siege, and by the way the siege lasted for 13 days, early in the siege, Travis sent out a courier by night with a letter begging for help. You know, we're outnumbered here. And the courier was instructed to go to all these surrounding communities and see if he could get some people to come in there and help us. And there's probably a mythical story that Travis got all the men out there together, drew a line in the sand with his sword, and said, if you want to stay and fight, step over the line. And they all did, except one. He said, I got too much sin on my soul, and I can't stay. So he went over the wall. Jim Bowie, who was sick and bedfast, was on a cot, and he said, pick me up and carry me across that line. I'm staying too. And so in the next 13 days, they are overwhelmed, and all 182 of them are killed. and Santa stacked their bodies up like cordwood and set them on fire, burned them. That letter that he sent out, here's the last paragraph of it. He said, I am determined to sustain myself as long as possible and die like a soldier who never forgets what is due to his own honor and that of his country. Victory or death. And it was death. And so, Timothy, be William Barrett Travis. You need to make that kind of commitment in your responsibility. And it may cost you your life, as it did Travis and those other defenders of the Alamo. Paul said, it's costing me mine, and I'm prepared to do that. I'm prepared to give my life for that. And so, Timothy, you need to assume the commitment and the dedication of a soldier, prepared for whatever comes your way. Thought about that? Any comments or thoughts? One at a time. Come on. Yes, sir.
This passage where he says, no soldier in active service entangles himself in the affairs of everyday life, so that he may please the one who enlisted him as a soldier.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're on. You're mic'd up.
Anyway, that verse 4 says it's not a part-time job.
Right.
Being a Christian is not something that you only do when you feel like it, when it's convenient, when it's on your time frame. If you're going to be in the Lord's army, you're going to have to be there and be prepared all the time.
It's a 24/7 job.
A lot of times we, in this century, have found it more convenient to be a Christian on our time. Mm-hmm. When we want to do it. And then other times we say, well, somebody else will carry the load when I'm not there. And Paul's just saying to Timothy, hey man, we're in this for the long haul.
Absolutely.
So you just better girt your belt up and hang in there, because God chose you for this particular service.
You're the next man up.
So he made sure that he picked the right men and women and children to be in the fight together. So it's not something that's a casual, part-time situation.
Sure.
It's something that God has chosen you for that purpose. So do it.
Good comments. Thank you, Bill. The next metaphor that he uses is that of the athlete. And that's another very common, very highly visible part of the culture of that day and time that Timothy would have been familiar with. The city of Ephesus had a stadium. It had 2 gymnasiums and an athletic field. The Olympic Games that they had borrowed from the Greeks and those athletic competitions were very common all over that area. And so when Paul used this analogy, Timothy would have understood that as well. And there is a lot of comparisons to the Christian life being a race, being a competition. Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Philippians chapter 3, verse 5, I press on, and the imagery there is a runner reaching for that finish line. The Hebrew writer says, we are encompassed about. We're in a stadium, and we got grandstands full of witnesses, these heroes of faith. And you need to put aside anything and everything that's going to hinder you in running this race. And so it's a very common analogy that Timothy would have grasped right away. And so, Timothy, you need the level and the discipline and the sacrifice of an athlete who's in training. But you've also not only got to train and discipline yourself, but you got to play fair. You got to play by the rules. And there are rules in this competition, and if you don't play by the rules and cheat, there are consequences. In secular competition, that's true. In spiritual competition, that's true as well. That's not legalism. Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And so that's how we stay on course. That's how we maintain and discipline our uniqueness as children of God through our holy living. And that's what these rules are that he's talking about. You may know this guy. The Super Bowl of bicycle racing is the Tour de France. It is a grueling 2,200-mile race. They run it every summer. It's through the countryside of France, through all kinds of terrain in the late summer. Lance Armstrong won that race 7 years in a row. That's unheard of. You can't do that. There are too many variables that come into play here. That'd be like a golfer winning the Masters 7 years in a row, or a baseball team winning the World Series 7 times in a row. That's not going to happen. And it really didn't happen for Lance Armstrong either. He cheated. They discovered that he had a little help from his friends, namely some illegal drugs that he was taking. And so as a result of that, he got stripped of those 7 titles. He is banned lifetime from competing ever again. Got him a lot of fame at the time, got him a lot of money at the time through endorsements and sponsors, but he lost it all because he didn't play by the rules. So Timothy, don't be Lance Armstrong. Don't cheat. Don't be tempted. There are going to be those who are going to come along here, in chapter 4, by the way, who are not going to listen to what you have to say. They're going to have itching ears, and they're going to bring to themselves people who will tell them what they want to hear. And you might be tempted to do that too. You might be tempted to modify your message to compete with those guys. Don't do that. Don't go there. Don't be Lance Armstrong. Play by the rules. Okay, other thoughts or questions about the second metaphor? You got the soldier and you got the athlete. Yes, sir.
Lance Armstrong there. It's a matter of integrity, right? And Timothy and all of us, if we're challenged with getting the message out, if we're challenged with living a life of righteousness, and claiming Christ and putting him on and saying we're going to be a Christian, we're challenged with making sure that along the way we don't do something that's going to disqualify us from having other people listen to us. Sure. We can disqualify ourselves and kind of muddy the message that we're trying to get out there if there's something that we have done, even if we're forgiven of it, but that somebody who knows about that thing might look at us and go, yeah, but I can't listen to you because I know what you did, right? So we have to walk carefully, right, as Christians, and make sure we don't disqualify ourselves from being able to speak that message. And I was thinking about Barry Bonds, right? Same thing. That guy I mean, there's no doubt that he had skill.
Sure.
He had the hand-eye coordination like nobody else. He could put that bat on the ball. That takes skill. But there's always going to be that asterisk by his name for his home run, records.
Good point. And Paul said the same thing. I have to buffet my body daily to make sure I'm playing by the rules. That I'm not telling other people to do what I'm not doing myself. Good point. Other thoughts? The last analogy he uses is a hard-working farmer, like this little girl. Farmers hard work. My father-in-law was a farmer, and I got to see that firsthand. It is hard work. And particularly in Timothy's day, before mechanization, before you had machines and you had to do it all by hand. That is hard labor, and it's difficult labor, and it's discouraging labor, and it's risk-taking labor. And it's a farmer's got to have two qualities. He's got to be diligent, and he's got to be patient. If you don't have either one of those, you're not going to be a successful farmer. You got to not just plant the seed and let it go and come back the next day and expect a harvest. Got to work hard. The farmer's different from these first two. The soldier, there's some glamour, there's some glory, and these Roman legions come back from their conquest, and they're hailed as heroes for what they've done, for the areas that they've conquered, the prisoners that they brought back. The athlete the same way. They will take out a section of the city wall for this athlete to come home. Kind of like we do today. Put these athletes up on pedestals. Farmer doesn't get much accolades. He does his work kind of under the radar, as important as it is. But Timothy, you got to have the diligence and the patience of a farmer if you're going to be successful in this. You got to work hard, and you got to be prepared for setbacks or discouragements. But you got to do it. Thoughts about the hard-working farmer? Yes, sir.
It almost seems too when he makes this third illustration of the farmer too, that he's reminding him that these people you're trying to teach, they're not going to, if you will, pop up out of the ground that day. I mean,
right.
You're going to have to. There's going to be some setbacks. There's going to be some. It's the patience. It's just a reminder for a guy like you said, for Timothy, who seems maybe a little bit down, a little bit browbeat, or whatever it is, that reminding him that these people might not listen Sunday. They might not listen next month, but keep doing what you're doing.
You plant, somebody else will water, God will give the increase. And you may see it, you may not see it. Yes, sir.
The second one where it talks about a victor does not receive, or similarly, anyone who competes as an athlete does not receive the victor's crown except by completing. The hardworking farmer should be the first to receive the share of crop.
Right.
Are these two in juxtaposition to each other?
Are they?
Well, it seems like, it feels like verse 5 is you don't get a reward until you complete it, but when you do complete it, you're the first one to get the reward.
For the farmer.
Yeah.
It should. That's what Paul is saying, I think. You're entitled to it because you put in the work. Is that... Sir?
Athletics.
Right.
I mean, the guy who works hardest gets in first place, and he gets just,
He gets
he's,
the medal.
He's first place. Yeah. Oh, I would say they're consistent, Adam.
Yeah. Okay. Verses 11 through 13, you probably in your Bible, you see that indented. Dave mentioned that when he was leading us in our discussion about 1 Timothy. It's thought that this was a hymn that was probably sung in the early Christian assemblies. If we die with him, then we live with him. If we endure with him, then we reign with him. If we deny him, then he denies us. If we're faithless, but he remains faithful. Well, the importance of hymns in our Christian walk. Well, I'm thankful for those men who select and lead songs that not only are songs of praise, but as Paul says to the Colossians and to the Ephesians, that we use these psalms and hymns and spiritual songs to teach each other and to edify each other and to encourage each other. And apparently this little inset here was that. It was a means whereby these early Christians, one of the means that early Christians used to strengthen and edify each other, as well as to offer praise to God. Look at verse 15. This is probably one of the better known passages in 2 Timothy. I have a slide for it, but you're familiar with this. Study to show yourself approved, he said. A workman that doesn't need to be ashamed. Boy, the importance of study. Paul says, Timothy, you've got to be a lifelong learner. It's got to be something to just be ongoing. You've got to continue to increase your knowledge. That's just part of the process. The Hebrew writer addresses that. He says, there's a time, you're at a time when you ought to be teachers, but you got a need for people to teach you those very basic things. You've been at this long enough, you ought to know more than you know. You should be eating solid food, but you're still on milk. The time has come for you to expand your basic knowledge. The Hebrew writer says, not laying again the foundations of the first principles. Those first principles are important. But there comes a time when you got to move on to the next level. Something a little heavier, something a little meatier. Like going to an advanced calculus class and the teacher said, well, today we're going to review the multiplication tables. Well, you come back the next day, well, let's go over those multiplication tables again. Well, multiplication tables are important, but when you get to that level, you hope you're beyond that. And so Timothy and you and me, time to advance our knowledge, increase our knowledge. And the only way to do that is by study. That handling a right is kind of a confusing term. And I'm told that a literal interpretation of that is a word that means to cut straight. It's the analogy of a road or a path being cut through the countryside in a straight direction so the traveler can go directly to his destination. A good workman stays on a straight path, and he makes it plain for others to follow. It's like a farmer plowing a straight furrow. So it's a combination of competence and character. And so your work's going to be inspected, Timothy. Don't be ashamed. The Word is the soldier's sword. The Word is the farmer's seed. And the Word is the workman's tool for building, for measuring, and for repairing God's people. So Timothy, you need to know what to do and how to do and why you do. So kind of a paraphrase of this verse, be diligent to present yourself as a workman who does not need to be ashamed, cutting a straight path with the word of truth, practically presenting and living out the word of truth. Now compare that with the bad workman in verses 16 through 18. The analogy there is a target that's being shot at and missed, swerving from the truth. The result is to lead people astray. And he mentions two men by name, Hymenaeus and Philetus. We don't know who these men are. That's all we got about them, just their names. And Paul has done this throughout this letter, but because of that, we can be assured that Timothy knows who they are. He doesn't have to identify them. He just, you know who they are and what they've done. And so their erroneous talk is spreading like gangrene, like poison through the body. And that's a bad workman. So compare those two workmen. Those two men have swerved away. They've wandered away. They've missed the mark. Okay, any thoughts about that particular verse or thought? Okay, let's handle this real quick. Paul says there's in a house there's two kind of dishes. There's some crystal goblets and some silver platters. And then there's some that are not. These crystal goblets and silver platters, these are you use only them when the special guests come. The others, the other dishes are like trash cans. They're like compost buckets. So you use the former to serve meals, special meals, fine meals. You use the other ones to take out the trash. So Timothy, be the kind of container that God can use you to serve good gifts to his guests for their blessings. Timothy, you're set apart. You're consecrated. Be a useful servant. Be ready for any good works. You need to shun your youthful passions and don't let the position of leadership that you're going to assume go to your head. Aim at righteousness. Aim at faith. Aim at love. Aim at peace. Run away from spiritual dangers. Run away from those like Joseph ran from Mrs. Potiphar. And then run to spiritual goods. Okay, any final thoughts? We got a few more verses left. We'll carry those over till next week because Paul is going to have some thoughts about words and how we use our words here at the end. He's got some warnings to Timothy about words, about picking our battles and the power of words. Because sometimes we get into, Paul calls them foolish arguments, stupid arguments, inane discussions that always end up in fights. People who tend to be argumentative just to be argumentative. You may know some people like that. You know some people like that, Dave?
I want to emphasize what you've emphasized.
Sure.
First of all, he says, verse 1, be strong. Verse
Right.
3, suffer hardship with me. Verse 4, soldier. Verse 5, athlete. Win the prize, compete. Hardworking, verse 6. I suffer hardship, even to imprisonment as a criminal. Verse 9, I endure. Verse 10. 11, if we died with him. 12, if we endure, we reign. If we deny him, etc. There in the other verses. He remains faithful, verse 13. Just when we look at those, it just seems so obvious.
Right.
He's really making a point, a strong point here.
Sure. So just to kind of see, good points there, Dave. Exercise the focus of a soldier. Oh, yes, sir.
What version are you using that uses crystal?
Sir?
I got gold and silver and wood and clay
Wood and clay, right.
and gold and silver.
Which one do you have? Which version
The
do you have?
ESV and the New King James.
I've got the NIV.
Uh,
Exercise the focus of a soldier, the dedication of an athlete, the diligence of a farmer as good soldiers and rule-keeping athletes, hardworking farmers. We got to be dedicated to our task. As an unashamed workman, we got to be accurate and clear in dealing with the word. And as vessels for noble use, we've got to be righteous in our character, in our conduct. And as the Lord's servants, we got to be courteous and gentle in our manner. So each of these metaphors that Paul uses focuses on a particular characteristic. And when we put them all together, they contribute to our usefulness in the kingdom. So we got to give ourselves wholeheartedly to our soldiering, to our running, and to our farming. Is Paul's message in this chapter 2. So next week, chapter 3. And it's a little shorter chapter, but we'll go there next week. Well, thank you for your comments this evening, and we will carry on next week.